Okay, so the air is definitely getting crisper. Days are shorter. And you sent over this fascinating stack of material for a deep dive into Samhain. Feels like such an ancient, significant time of year.
It really does. And these sources, they often place it right around October 31st evening through November 1st. It's presented as this major transition point.
Right, not just wrapping up the harvest season.
Exactly. It's framed as, the beginning of the dark half of the year, a real turning point. That's why the material mentions it's often called the Witch's New Year in traditions like Wicca, paganism, Celtic witchcraft.
Yeah, that makes sense. And while many of us think Halloween carved pumpkins, costumes, trick-or-treating, and the sources acknowledge those connections, tracing some roots back.
They do touch on that, yeah. But they pivot pretty quickly to something much deeper, much more spiritual.
That's what struck me. Beyond the familiar stuff, is presented as fundamentally a time for reflection, honoring the departed.
Precisely. Reflection, honoring those who've passed, and really preparing for that quieter, more introspective winter energy. That's the core concept these sources keep coming back to.
And underpinning all of that, according to the ancient Celtic roots they discuss, is this idea about the veil, right, between worlds.
Yes, the veil between the physical and the spirit world. It's believed, or presented as being believed, to be at its absolute thinnest during Samhain.
Thinnest, so like more permeable.
Exactly. That permeability is seen as key, like a window opening up, allowing for, well, easier communication with spirits, with ancestors.
And that's where this deep dive really needs to focus, based on this material, how people use this time specifically to connect with ancestral wisdom, get guidance, that sort of thing.
So yeah, leaving the surface level behind and really getting into the rituals, the practices these sources describe for connecting with those who came before.
Okay, so this honoring ancestors thing, it's not just a one-off ritual, is it? The material suggests it's more fundamental.
Right. It's presented as a vital part of the spiritual path for many practitioners described here. It's about consciously maintaining that link to your lineage, your roots, accessing that collective wisdom passed down through generations.
And Samhain, because of that thin veil idea, becomes this really potent moment for it.
A particularly powerful time, yeah. To consciously reach out, maybe ask for guidance, healing, or blessings from ancestral spirits. That's the perspective offered.
The intent seems crucial, though.
Absolutely. The sources stress that. The practices themselves can vary wildly simple or elaborate, but the goal underneath is fostering that connection. Understanding maybe the cycle of life, death, rebirth.
Okay, so let's shift from the why to the how. What concrete ways do these sources suggest people actually engage with their ancestors during Samhain?
Well, the first and probably most emphasized practice described is creating an ancestral altar.
An altar, like a specific dedicated space.
Exactly. A physical anchor point, you could say. A space set aside just for this communication.
And what goes on it? What do the sources mention?
They list things like photographs of departed loved ones, definitely. Or maybe objects that belonged to them, things that held personal significance.
So very personal items.
Very personal. Candles are mentioned too often, black or white, symbolizing transition, spirit, and offerings are key.
Offerings like what?
Food, drink, maybe something they particularly enjoyed in life, flowers, things like that.
That personal touch again, connecting objects to memory.
Yeah, that's highlighted. Things that evoke a strong connection to your specific lineage. They also sometimes suggest incorporating certain crystals like obsidian, onyx, maybe moonstone, things associated with protection or intuition.
Right.
And maybe a cauldron or a bowl is sometimes included, symbolizing rebirth or that liminal space.
So you set up this space.
hmm
Then what? How do you actively use it for connection, according to these sources?
Well, the steps outlined usually involve lighting the candles, consciously making an offering, often with a prayer or some kind of invocation, explicitly asking for their presence or guidance.
Right.
And visualizing the ancestors receiving those offerings as you place them, that's suggested too.
And then just wait.
Sort of, yes. Spending quiet time at the altar is really encouraged in the material. That could be meditation or consciously trying to listen for messages or even just reflecting on memories, thinking about the wisdom they might offer.
Okay.
Oh, and adding a slip of paper with an ancestor's name and maybe a specific question or wish is also mentioned, a way to focus your intent.
That makes a lot of sense. Creating the sacred space and then dedicating real time to it. Are there other methods mentioned beyond the altar?
Yes, definitely. The sources describe more, let's say, active approaches too. One is called an ancestor invocation ceremony.
Okay, sounds more formal.
A bit more focus, yeah. An intentional calling upon their spirits.
And how does that typically unfold based on this material?
Preparation involves creating a sacred space, often, dim lighting. Cleansing the space first is recommended using sage, palo santo, whatever method you prefer.
Setting the stage.
Exactly. And some practitioners, the sources say, might cast a circle or call the directions for protection, defining the working area.
Creating those energetic boundaries before you open the door, so to speak.
Precisely. Then you clearly state your intention for the ceremony. Are you seeking guidance, protection, or just offering deep honor and gratitude?
Okay.
There's often an example invocation provided, something along the lines of, I call upon my ancestors, those who walked before me. I honor your wisdom, your struggles. I ask for your presence, your guidance. You get the idea.
And it emphasizes actually speaking their names, welcoming them.
Yes, speaking names aloud. Maybe lighting a specific candle for each ancestor you're focusing on, offering a prayer or statement of remembrance for them.
And then,
Crucially, after that active calling, silence. The sources really stress listening, being open to subtle messages, trusting your intuition, that inner knowing.
listening for that response, however it might manifest. Interesting. The sources also mention sharing a meal.
Oh yes, the ancestor feast or dumb supper. It's described as a very traditional way to honor them.
How does that work?
Preparing a special meal, maybe including foods they loved, or just a seasonal feast. Things like pumpkin, apples, nuts, root vegetables are often mentioned, tying it back to the harvest aspect.
Is there a ritual component to eating it?
Absolutely. The practice outlined is setting an extra place at the table, specifically for the ancestors you want to honor. Sometimes this is done in silence, hence the dumb supper name, though not always.
I see.
Before eating, you take time for reflection, speaking their names, acknowledging their influence, offering thanks. Then a portion of the food might be placed on the altar or offered outside later, symbolically sharing the meal.
So it becomes a communal act, even
Yeah.
across the veil. What about more internal methods, intuitive approaches?
Right, the sources bring up something called a Samhain ancestor journey. This is more for people familiar with shamanic journeying or deep meditation techniques. The idea is that the thin veil makes this an ideal time for a guided meditation or journey specifically aimed at accessing the spirit world to connect with ancestors.
So less physical setup, more internal visualization.
Exactly. You prepare a quiet space where you won't be disturbed, set a very clear intention for the journey, maybe seeking specific guidance or healing or just accessing ancestral wisdom.
And then you.
Journey.
Then, through deep breathing, visualization, maybe drumming sounds, you enter a meditative state and begin. The sources mention visualizing common motifs, walking into woods, crossing water, descending stairs.
Classic journeying imagery.
Yes, using those archetypal images to shift consciousness. The aim is to visualize a meeting place, invite your ancestors, and then just be open. Open to messages, images, feelings, whatever comes through.
And then grounding afterwards.
Always. Expressing gratitude and consciously returning, grounding yourself back in your physical body and space.
It really sounds like several different paths here, all pointing towards that same goal of connection. Lastly, the sources mention divination tools.
Tools like tarot cards, scrying mirrors, pendulums. They're suggested as potentially helpful aids for communication and insight from ancestors, especially during Samhain.
Okay, so how might you use tarot specifically for this, according to the material?
The description usually involves preparing your deck, maybe lighting a candle on your ancestor altar to focus the energy, then shuffling with the explicit intention of seeking ancestral guidance.
So asking a question aimed directly at them.
Exactly. You might ask something like, ancestors, what wisdom do I need right now regarding my path? Or how can I best honor my lineage in the coming year?
And then interpret the cards you draw.
Right. Draw cards, maybe a simple 3-card spread is suggested, and interpret them, but paying extra close attention to any messages, symbols, or just intuitive hits that feel specifically linked to that ancestral connection you were seeking.
Using the symbolic language of the cards as a kind of channel.
That's how it's presented, yes.
Yeah.
Another potential method to seek that connection and insight during this really potent time.
Wow. This deep dive, based on your sources, really paints Samhain as so much more than just, a festive holiday.
It really does. The material consistently comes back to this core idea. Samhain is fundamentally about honoring the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and consciously engaging with that cycle.
And by doing these rituals, The intention described in the sources is about tapping into, connecting with this long line of wisdom, of strength, that exists beyond time and physical form.
And because that veil is seen as thinnest, it becomes, from this perspective, a uniquely powerful moment, a time for deep personal reflection, yes, but also for actively showing gratitude and respect to those who paved the way.
So it really encourages you, the listener, to consider these different ways to describe the altar, the invocation, the meal, the journey, the divination tools as different potential avenues for making that profound connection.
Exactly. And perhaps to embrace the perspective offered in the material about the, quote, magic of Samhain, letting that idea of ancestral connection guide you into the darker months with maybe a renewed sense of strength and clarity.
It leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it?
It does. Perhaps the most provocative thought these sources leave you with is, if you consciously acknowledge and connect with your past, with your ancestors, how might that fundamentally shift how you perceive and navigate your future?
Something to definitely carry with you as the seasons turn. And based on the source's final thought,
Blessed Samhain.